Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started with our webinar, and I'll hand it off to ASH Director Laurent Hubert.
Thank you very much, Nichelle. And so welcome everyone to this webinar today on the topic of protecting children from the tobacco industry interference, and particularly in this case, also using human rights arguments and mechanisms, and more particularly the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to protect children from the tobacco industry. So those are all topics that align with this year's World No Tobacco Day topic, which is protecting children from the tobacco industry for interference. The webinar today is hosted by ASH, Action on Smoking and Health, Unfairtobacco in Germany, and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. And there's unfortunately some dangers and worrying trends when it comes to youth and tobacco. According to the CDC, already 9 out of 10 adults who smoke started before they were 18. So we know that most smokers start smoking before they're 18. Already in 2020, the WHO, one of the reports suggesting that 9 out of 10 smokers start using tobacco before they're 18. And in the Tobacco Atlas, they suggested that half of the survey countries, there was an increase in smoking in female youth, and in many cases, both male and female youth. So it's definitely a continued problem that we have to address. And today we have 3 speakers who will address this issue and will present various topics related to using UN human rights treaties like the Convention on the Rights of the Child to protect children from the tobacco industry. And that will be followed by a Q&A session. For the Q&A, please use the icon at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A to direct the questions to the panelists. You can feel free to direct it to any of the panelists. So I'll start with the first speaker, who's Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, who will just address in general how tobacco is a children's rights issue, and general information about using human rights mechanisms to address and report on countries' progress or lack of progress towards tobacco control to protect their children and their population in general. Kelsey, the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to our speakers for joining us. This is a great panel. So I wanted to talk today about protecting children from the tobacco industry using human rights mechanisms. And I wanted to highlight that in honor of World No Tobacco Day 2024, we've released a report on this very topic. So I will be talking about that a little bit today, but please feel free to look at the report and it will have some more in-depth information for you. And thank you to Unfairtobacco for co-sponsoring that report with us. Oh, yep, there we go. And there's a picture of the front page of the report, Protecting Children from the Tobacco Industry. So I wanted to do first a brief overview of how tobacco violates children's rights, because it does so in a number of ways, and they're not always completely obvious. The first is the environment. Children obviously have a large stake in the right to the environment. They're going to be here longer than we are, and they need a healthy environment. Cigarettes harm the environment all the way through their life cycle, from growth all the way through to waste. As many of you know, ASH has been involved in trying to get plastic cigarette filters banned as part of the Plastics Treaty. But there are numerous environmental issues that all impact children's rights. Child labor is another one. I believe Sonja might mention this more, but children around the world work in tobacco fields and are exposed to chemicals and toxins and can become very, very ill, not to mention the fact that their work impinges on their right to education and also their right to information around what they're doing. So child labor in the tobacco industry is a huge violation of children's rights. Another violation of rights is advertising. Tobacco advertising varies from country to country and in the United States from state to state, but a lot of advertising has been targeted at children, either overtly or more covertly recently. But Children are very susceptible to tobacco advertising, and the tobacco industry knows that and targets things directly to them. That advertising increases the number of children who start smoking and therefore violates their right to health. Another issue that impacts children's rights is flavored tobacco products. Flavors absolutely increase the likelihood that children will start smoking and keep smoking. And again, this varies around the world, but flavored tobacco products have been available to children, and now flavored e-cigarette products are an issue as well. So these flavored products can really increase initiation among children and make it harder for them to quit, and more desirable for them to continue. So those are big issues as well. I briefly wanted to address the human rights tools that address children's rights, and then I'm going to talk about how to use them. But the first one is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is the overarching human rights treaty on children's rights. It's one of, if not the most widely accepted, universally adopted human rights treaties. For those of us in the United States, we are not a party, but almost every country in the world is. So this is something that is widely understood to be good for the world and supportive of many, many different kinds of children's rights. There is specific conversation on health. I mentioned the right to education earlier, right to information. So there are a lot of different elements of the Convention of the Rights of the Child that are relevant to tobacco control. There are also other treaties that can be relevant as well. They're a little bit more case by case, so I didn't list them all here. But for example, if we're talking about targeting to girls, we would also include the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. So not only would the Convention on the Rights of the Child be implicated, but also protecting women, because we're talking about girl children. If you're talking about children of a different race, it could include the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. There's a treaty on persons with disabilities, so that could be relevant. And then there's also a general overarching treaty, the Treaty on Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights, that includes a right to health as well. Also, the overarching Human Rights Committee has a reporting process called the Universal Periodic Review that is for every country that is a part of the Human Rights Council. So I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but that's relevant as well. So how do we use these human rights standards and tools to protect children from the tobacco industry? First is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Every country party has to report to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is a sitting committee whose job it is to make sure countries are doing what they need to do to uphold this treaty. So every 5 years or 6 years, it's a little variable, but about every 5 years, every country has to report to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the committee has a chance to evaluate the countries and see how they're doing. Advocates should be present in this reporting process to make sure that tobacco is included. As I mentioned before, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is huge. It covers pretty much every conceivable issue you can think of with children, adoption, sexual rights, all kinds of different things. So they don't necessarily think about tobacco, and that's why the public health community needs to be there reminding them. So there's a couple ways to do that. One is in the actual government reporting. The public health advocates should be encouraging your government to include tobacco in their reporting to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Obviously, some governments might be more open to that than others, which is why there's also a parallel reporting process where civil society can submit reports to the committee that the committee reviews when they're reviewing the country reports as well. There's also a lot of opportunities for oral interventions and to meet with committee members. There's a lot of room for advocacy around the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I think that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is particularly ripe for tobacco control, because I think that everyone wants to protect children, and protecting children from tobacco seems like almost low-hanging fruit, I think. There's been a lot of success in various countries around the world, and I think that gives us a lot of examples to point to and say, this country is doing it well. The committee should ask this other country to do it like that. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved. ASH encourages groups and countries all the time to do this, and we are happy to provide technical assistance. If you're interested in submitting a report to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, please feel free to reach out to me, and we can look at the next time your country is reporting. Let me go back one slide. Hold on one second. I mentioned the other treaties. We are also reporting to other treaties, and we, of course, want to include information that's relevant to children's rights. We're planning a group of interventions to the CEDAW committee this fall. We're calling it a CEDAW blast. We're trying to get as many countries as possible to include tobacco in their reports to the CEDAW committee this fall. Those will, of course, include things that impact children's rights. So we want to make sure that we're highlighting that, and also that we are connecting that for the committees. So it would be a great idea for us to make sure that the Committee on the Rights of the Child sees that report or sees that information as well, because it's obviously, if it impacts women and girl children, then it also falls under the parameters of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So we will want to make sure we're cross-referencing and making those UN committees connect, because they don't always. So that's one role we can play, is making sure that that information is getting across the boundary lines there. We can also use human rights arguments in proactive litigation against the tobacco industry. For many years, the public health community and governments have been on the defensive when it comes to litigation. And we've started using this phrase proactive litigation to talk about, suing the industry, using the courts to our advantage, instead of just waiting for them to come after new laws or new processes. So human rights arguments are used in court very frequently, especially internationally, less so domestically in the US. But there's been more and more examples of human rights litigation really making the news, and being, I think, very interesting and persuasive to people. There's a lot of environmental cases where children have taken the lead, and have used their right to a healthy environment argument to move the needle on that. And I think that the tobacco control community could consider that as well. So we should be using these human rights arguments in all of our litigation. And then the last way, and the most obvious way to protect children from the tobacco industry, is tobacco endgame. If we ban the sale of commercial cigarettes, then children around the world will largely be protected from the actions of the tobacco industry. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that one. I know it's fairly obvious, but it's very important. I mentioned intersections, and I just wanted to highlight it one more time. Children's rights aren't in a silo. Tobacco impacts children and the right to development and non-communicable diseases and vulnerable populations and social justice, and all of these things go together. And I think it's our job as advocates to illustrate that for the human rights community and the public health community, that decreasing tobacco use will help increase our progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals and other things like that. I think that goes a long way sometimes with the human rights community. So it's important to make sure we're breaking down those silos. As I wrap up, I just wanted to point out the Tobacco and Human Rights Hub on the ASH website. We maintain this resource to have examples of the reports that I've mentioned, to have news articles about the litigation, to have the human rights treaty links. It's meant to be a one-stop shop for a connection between tobacco and human rights. And I mention this frequently, but I'm the one that updates it. So if you would like to see a resource there, please feel free to email it to me. And I would be happy to put it there. Or if you're looking for a resource, please feel free to email me as well. I would love some feedback on the hub. It's always appreciated. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Kelsey. And the slide about the end game that you said about how endgame would be the solution to protect children from the tobacco industry fully aligns with the conclusion that the Danish Institute for Human Rights basically was their conclusion after their basically what was in public like a human rights audit of Philip Morris International, where they concluded that basically in order to protect the right to health, basically, tobacco companies should end the marketing of tobacco products. I have a quick question, Kelsey, before we're going to go to the next speaker, who's going to give a very specific example of a use at country level of a human rights treaty body and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, in this case, to advance tobacco control. But a very, very quick question, Kelsey. We have the FCTC. Why is it so important that we use those human rights reporting processes in the context of the FCTC? Could you quickly, in 2 minutes, address that?
Sure. So for anyone who's not familiar with the acronym, the FCTC is the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the Tobacco Treaty. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control does not have a robust reporting mechanism or an enforcement mechanism. So human rights treaties do. And this provides a way for us to integrate tobacco into those enforcement mechanisms.
Thank you for that clarification. And so now we're going to have the next speaker, Sonja von Eichborn, who the director of Unfairtobacco. And they really used that approach, working with children's groups, to submit a report, which led to very specific recommendations from the committee to Germany. So it's great to have you on board for this very, very practical example on how we can use the Convention on the Rights of the Child to ask our countries to do more to protect our children from tobacco. Sonja, the floor is yours.
Hi to all. Thanks for having me. I will just share my screen. Kelsey, will you have to stop sharing the screen before? Great, then I can do that. Oh, that's the wrong one. So do you see now my slides? Or do you still see the PowerPoint, the PDF? Do you see slides? Okay. So now we go and we dig deep into the experiences from Germany. We did the whole reporting cycle of Germany and tried to get tobacco control into it. So what was our point of departure? Germany was at least received as a human rights champion in the world, and was last in tobacco control in Europe in 2018. Unfairtobacco has an expertise in children's rights and environment in tobacco growing, and as well expertise in advocacy for tobacco control in Germany. And Action on Smoking and Health did partner with us on human rights and tobacco control, especially in the case with the Danish Institute for Human Rights and their already cited statement. And then Ash suggested that we should use the CRC reporting circle to strengthen tobacco control in Germany. And thanks to you offered advice and initial funding. We started the process. Germany was due to report in April 2019. And this was our opportunity, which we wanted to use. We had different goals. The most important goal was to raise awareness about tobacco use as a children's rights issue among German children's rights advocates, among German public and policymakers, among the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. As well, we wanted to see that tobacco use is mentioned in the list of issues, and that the German government answers the question which is in the list. And we also wanted that the concluding observations, so after the whole reporting process, the committee mentions tobacco use in these observations and recommendations. So to get this, to get into the reporting cycle and to do all this, you need a lot of allies. We had a national network in Germany, the National Coalition Germany. It's a network of children's rights organizations, and we became member there. Then we founded a network on children's rights and tobacco control, where we invited public health, sustainable development, and children's rights organizations, and we all got together to work on that issues. And finally, we got our school class. It was a class from an elementary school with special language needs. It was a group of children aged 10 years. And we started a series of workshops with them. You can see one of them raising his hand and waving.
Sonja, we see the,
yeah. What?
We see the PDF, not the PowerPoint.
Ah, okay. Then I will have to stop and try to get the PowerPoint again. Sorry. Okay, that's this one. I'm very sorry. Do you now see it, the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. And now you see the child waving at you?
Yes.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. Okay, so you see the class we were working with, and you see them while they write down on their paper, we want tobacco to be stopped. This was one of the sessions where we were discussing what could we do. I will now show you shortly the reporting cycle, how it works, and where we submitted interventions into this process. So between the state parties report, which you see in the up here at the one, and the session, the pre-session, where the committee is discussing this report, we submitted 4 reports in 2019 and 2020. And then we went to the pre-session in 2021. After that, there was this list of issues I was talking about. These are questions referred to the government. They answered it, and after these answers were public, we also submitted another paper to the committee before they got into the constructive dialogue between the committee and the state party. So what did we submit? First, we worked with the national network, and we contributed to the health chapter in the national report. You see it on the right side, the blue one. And there was then finally mentioned that the committee should recommend the German government to fulfill everything in the FCTC. That was a great success to get it into that report, because reports like this tend to have too less space to have everything mentioned. And as well, we supported the children's report of the national network, and then we had the secondhand smoke featured in that children's report. You see it on the left side, on the upper left side here. About 50% of children reported that they are affected by tobacco use either daily or sometimes, but about 50% of children reported to have a problem with it. Then we organized within our network for children's rights and tobacco control a report and focused on tobacco use in Germany as well as on tobacco cultivation. And the point why we did that, Kelsey mentioned it already, in the tobacco supply chain, there is, for example, child labor on the tobacco fields. And that means not only that children are missing school, but the labor there is one of the worst forms of child labor because it's dangerous, because you can be affected by a nicotine poisoning by just touching all those plants. So for children, this is really an issue and interferes very much with their healthy development. So this is why we included both parts, tobacco use and tobacco cultivation. And then we worked on with our children in the school class, and we produced different videos and had a cut of these videos, which they handed in as their video report to the UN committee. And they talked about tobacco use, about how it affects their life, about secondhand smoke, and about child labor as well. So this is what the committee got from us before the pre-session. Then we were invited to go there, and we quickly coordinated with our national network to be within this delegation and to be coordinated, because this pre-session was due to Corona, an online session. So it was a very, very short period of time. It was only 2 hours for all issues. So we had to be very much coordinated. It went really well. And before we also prepared a report of our network and an additional information after the pre-session. And what was very important for us, we were asked questions from the committee. So they asked us about tobacco smoke, and they also asked about how tobacco control is forced in Germany, about socioeconomic inequalities, and also about the supply chain due diligence. So that means they really took our 4 reports serious and wanted to inquire into this issue. Then 1 year later was the government dialogue, and just before this session, we again submitted another statement with some updates, and we coordinated with the national network for press releases. We have not been to Geneva for the session due to time and funding problems, but from the national networks, people were there. So, so we had also people on the ground to ask them to do something or to say something. Let me come to the results. We did raise awareness among children's rights advocates because they are participating in our network until today. They have been using this network for different issues like the smoking ban in cars or the tobacco ad ban. And to this World No Tobacco Day, we also will do something about tobacco industry and children's rights. I will not tell what. You will find out on the 31st of May. The German public and policymakers got aware because it was also mentioned during parliamental debates where children's rights are infringed through tobacco marketing, for example. And also children's rights were included in the Tobacco Atlas Germany, which is like the core information on tobacco in Germany, on tobacco use in Germany. And as well, a very small part of German public got aware of it because the school class got awarded the Fair Trade Award because they spoke out against fair traded tobacco. The Committee of the Rights of the Child, as I already mentioned, they got really aware of us. And what I want to emphasize here is that in the government dialogue in September 2022, they used tobacco growing as the example to discuss mandatory corporate due diligence, so the German Supply Chain Act, during the session. So the people who had to answer the questions were very surprised because they thought about different supply chains, like cars or something. And but they had to do something to talk about tobacco growing, which was also a nice issue, a nice thing for us. I was talking about having tobacco in the list of issues and having the government answered. We achieved this goal as well. Especially the focus was on socioeconomically disadvantaged children and their tobacco use. And the government answered, we have our Youth Protection Act, and this is followed, which is a very, it's an easy answer. This is why we reported again, or we did some more submissions. And then finally, we come to our ultimate goal, concluding observations. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child recommended the German government in September 2022 to better protect children and youth from tobacco use, from marketing, as well as from exploitation. So this was a really big win. It was the very first time that in concluding observations from the committee to the German government, tobacco use was mentioned with a recommendation. And this is from what we are still sourcing. And we will use this World No Tobacco Day to do some more work on it. Quickly, our challenge was more or less Corona. This was due because the activities have been cancelled. That we lost the contact to the children, so we could not bring them to the pre-session. That was very sad. And the UNCRC cycle has been postponed every now and again. So the whole cycle was 2 years longer than scheduled before. So we ran out of funding. So this is why we have been cutting down some activities in the end. But finally, we got to our goal, so we are happy with it. What our lessons learned are: take time to create trusting relationships, because allies are very important for such a long-term issue. Ask for advice and listen to experts. This goes especially to Ash, because it was very crucial to have your knowledge and support in the whole process. And finally, this is something I will always say again and again: show up when the opportunity comes, because such a pre-session is a once in a long time opportunity to do something. If you are there and you answer their questions, you really get the issue into their mind, into their awareness, and they will do something about it. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope you have got an interesting insight into the German case.
Thank you so much, Sonja. And what you stated at the end is so important, is just showing up and taking advantage of those opportunities. We tend to, in a lot of the human rights processes that are there, the tobacco control community and even the non-communicable disease community tends to shine by its absence often. And the groups that are there are definitely taking more advantage of this. So that's a very good point, and there'll definitely be questions for you during the Q&A. And now we'll go to our last speaker for today before we go into the Q&A session. So it's Gianella Severini from the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and the Advocacy Incubator, who will present a new human rights reporting tracker that focuses mostly on the right to health. And I'll also take this opportunity to congratulate Gianella publicly for our very well-deserved award, World No Tobacco Day award from the World Health Organization that was announced publicly today. So congratulations, Gianella, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Laurent, and thank you, Ash, for the invitation. And it's really a pleasure to join the efforts in this webinar, highlighting the theme for this year for the World No Tobacco Day. And thank you again for the congratulations. I'm very happy. We're very happy. This is a team effort. And well, so for today, the idea that we had was to show a new tracker, as Laurent was mentioning, that is very related to what has been discussed during the webinar. And just a few, like a very brief mention to say that what I will present is a joint effort of the legal team I work with at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and also the Global Health Advocacy Incubator, where we work not only in tobacco control policies, but other public health issues such as healthy food policies. And so as we were listening before Kelsey, the Convention on the Rights of the Child recognizes the right to the highest attainable standard of health and related rights of children, such as the rights to adequate standard of living, education, and information. And as Kelsey said, there are multiple aspects that affect children, such as the tobacco industry pollution, to the environment, child labor, advertising that is directed to children, flavored tobacco products, and many others. And so there are many, many multiple rights that are at stake. And human rights are essential to advocate for effective policy change, and as it was shown before, there are many ways into which civil society organizations can advocate and can utilize these rights. So there is a state reporting process that occurs every 2 or 5 years, and this allows the opportunity for civil society organizations to get involved through the submissions of shadow reports, as Kelsey was saying, and Ash has a great experience in submitting these reports, and as Sonja was telling us before, there are many different organizations that have submitted these reports. And here I have such an example that is very similar to the one that was shown by Sonja, where an NGO in Argentina, FIC Argentina, submitted a shadow report to another committee, not the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but the CEDAW committee, highlighting that tobacco measures are essential to fulfilling women's rights, and also requesting the importance of the ratification of the FCTC, because Argentina has not yet ratified the FCTC. And the good news was that the committee highlighted in its concluding observation that Argentina was not fulfilling its obligations under the convention, and it specifically recommended Argentina to ratify the FCTC. And this is a very important tool that organizations in Argentina are using to advocate for the ratification of the FCTC. And we expect that there will be more concluding observations, more recommendations after the last COP10 decision, where we had a specific decision that called on parties to reinforce the relationship between tobacco control and human rights. So what we did with the team at CTFK and GHAI is that we created this hub with the idea of uploading different documents that can be useful for advocates that want to use these human rights instruments, these recommendations specifically for policy change. And we have in the hub general recommendations, country-specific recommendations that would be concluding observations, and special reports that are the ones that have been developed by the special rapporteurs from the UN. And we can take a look, for example, at those specific recommendations drafted by the Committee on the Rights of the Child on specific concluding observations directed to countries, and I'm going to show you some of these recommendations that we have in the hub. So this is the way in which you can search into the repository, and you can search by topic, by document type, country, policy area, the human rights that you're interested in looking for. And so, for example, let's say what would happen if we would look for country recommendations on from the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Here, for example, we have the specific recommendation that Sonja was showing before, a specific recommendation that was done for Germany in 2022. And as she was saying, well, here we have the text of the recommendation. We highlight some of the specifics that the recommendation have with regards to tobacco control in this case, and the specific citations so that advocates can download it directly from there. But we don't only have concluding observations, specific recommendations for countries, but we also have recommendations that are general. So, for example, if we go and look for general recommendations that were issued by the Committee of the Rights of the Child, here, for example, we have one from 2021 that was issued by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and that made a specific reference to tobacco products in the spectrum of the digital area. And it said specifically in the text of the recommendation that states should encourage the use of digital technologies to promote healthy lifestyles, including physical and social activities, and that states should regulate the digital advertising, specifically when it comes to tobacco and other nicotine products. So as you see, we have many different recommendations that can be useful for advocates to take a look at. As I was saying before, this is not only for tobacco products, but also food products. And we also have some recommendations that are referring to corporate behavior in general and industry interference. So maybe some other industries and recommendations that can be useful in general, not only for the tobacco industries, but for many others. Thank you very much. I leave the link here to the hub, and I'm available for any question, and thanks again for the space for sharing the new resource.
Thank you, Gianella, and for sharing that information, which will be quite helpful. And I think we should also remember that the COP10 recently in Panama adopted a decision on the contribution of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control to human rights, which calls on governments to also further engage in those reporting, to further address tobacco when they engage in the reporting processes, and also further collaboration between the FCTC and the UN entities that have a human rights mandates, which I think all of those resources will be quite helpful also to those working on this. So we now have ample of time for a Q&A. And again, continue sending them to through the Q&A session, and I have a few here. And so the very first question I have is on then what's next? So for example, in the case of Germany, the committee made some concluding observations. But so what's next, and what have been you mentioned some of the challenges, what have been the key challenges? And also tying to one of the other questions that came in is on the use of liability. So what could be done next in the context of Germany, and is litigation and human using, for example, the fact that in this case, a committee made a specific recommendation to a country like Germany, litigation could be used. I mean, there was an example mentioned, for example, but in the case of Israel, for example, from someone in the audience. So it's a question actually for the three of you. Maybe Sonja, you can get started, and then Kelsey, I'd like to hear from Kelsey and Gianella as the lawyers on how do they see that as a potential for human rights litigation. Sonja, why don't you go first?
Thank you for this question. Yes, sure. On the case of on the issue of litigation, I'm not the right person to talk, but what are we doing now with this result? We are like after the reporting cycle is before the reporting cycle. So we have already a midterm report from the German national network where tobacco use, tobacco control has a whole page. That means the pressure is still rising on the German government. And in Germany, the next elections will be next year. So there is only a little time left to do what they said they would do when they started their term. And one of the pieces is that they want to regulate, stronger regulate tobacco or nicotine and alcohol and cannabis marketing. And this is where we can very much use the CONOPS, the concluding observations or the recommendations of the committee to put more pressure on the government to really amend the law before the period is over, and this is where we are trying to do. Actually, also again with our network of different organizations, because that's very important to have different organizations from different backgrounds blowing the same horn to get more political pressure on it. That's what
just
we
to
do
clarify
here.
that I understood correctly. So then you're using those concluding recommendations from the Committee on the Rights of the Child to Germany to influence the amendment of the tobacco law in Germany, and bringing on also new actors and players in human rights and children's group as part of that process.
Yeah, this is right. We try to connect to them, and we also try to get connections to connect to organizations working on alcohol. So to broaden the spectrum on unhealthy commodities. Okay. So it's more it's public pressure what we are trying to use to get the policymakers to do their job.
So that's definitely one advantages of using human rights-based approach. So I just want to then go back for the two lawyers on the panel on that using litigation, and just because, for example, we know in Montana the litigation was fun and the court found that young people at a constitutional right to a healthy environment, and in this case, the state of Montana had to consider the potential of climate change for future generation. And Professor Amos, who's a lawyer and who's made a comment about a very recent case in Israel where they successfully used litigation to protect children's right, among others, in the context of indoor housing, basically. So I'm curious from the two lawyers about how do you think, how far could we go, and is this a viable tool to put more pressure on governments to do the right thing to protect the right to health of citizens, or even litigation against the industry?
You want to go first, Gianella, or should I go?
Go ahead first.
So I think this is an incredible step for litigation. I want to be clear for people who aren't lawyers, human rights litigation, if you're charging a human rights violation, you're arguing that the government is violating someone's rights. So it's not a lawsuit against a corporation, it would be a lawsuit against the government. So I think that having something like the concluding observations that you have in Germany is a huge step, because it just provides documentation that other people think that these rights are being violated, and that other person is an International Human Rights Committee. So I don't think you can get much better proof than that. So for a national level litigation, I think that's just absolutely incredible, and a great way forward.
Yeah, and what I wanted to mention in line with what Kelsey was saying was that in many Latin American countries, for example, human rights have a constitutional range. So it's not only that the state has ratified the treaty and is mandated to protect, defend, and guarantee a specific human right, but it is also entailed in its own constitution. And that is the example of many countries such as Argentina and many others in the region. So the rights can be also used because they are enshrined in their constitution, and many constitutional claims can be done at the local level. So not only using the instruments at the international level or maybe at the regional level, but in the same states, in their same courts where they can use the human rights framework. And speaking about lawsuits against the industry, since as Kelsey was saying, these are rights that need to be, that are an obligation from the states, we can also sometimes do the connection. And for example, there's a recent case in Brazil where there is a lawsuit against the tobacco industry for the healthcare related costs. And it's very similar to the lawsuits that were filed in the US. So they are asking specifically to the tobacco industry to pay for all the costs that they have created with the tobacco epidemic. And in this industry, the argument of the need of the right to health of citizens has been very important. So there are ways to use the rights and to connect them so that we can make our cases against the industry, and also our case to urge the states to protect our rights more comprehensive by using this framework.
And you're saying using all of the rights which are indivisible, not that strengthen our hands, so to speak. In Switzerland, for example, I saw one area I was interested in is the right of a child to fully develop as an individual, for example, something that was in their constitution as something that was important or could be used in that context. There was one question that came up about now a lot of nicotine products don't even have tobacco anymore. And so given that nicotine addiction starts before the onset of adulthood in most countries, would you still be able to, so only tobacco products, or could we extend that to just addiction and nicotine addiction, and to be free from nicotine addiction, even if the product even if you had like nicotine in a soluble water and was supposedly physiologically not harmful, would it still be an issue from?
So I can address that first. I think from a human rights perspective, absolutely, that's a concern. Addiction is a human rights issue. And I think advertising, and particularly things targeted at children who can't make a legal decision, anything that has an addictive element should be considered in a human rights lens.
Gianella or Sonja, do you want to add to that?
I can add to that. In Germany, for example, the vape industry is very strong, or not the industry, but vapes are very on trend. So the disposable vapes, and this is why we also talk about a lot of the time when we talk to children or in the public, we talk about tobacco and nicotine products. So to include them, because most of the nicotine up to now, which is in e-cigarettes or vapes, is derived from tobacco. So if it is called tobacco free, then still the nicotine has been derived from tobacco. And we try to show this as well. So nicotine products are in the scope, and as soon as we write the next report to the committee, we will include them as well.
Yes, and very short to add to that, as Kelsey and Sonja were saying, we're talking about addiction. So the human rights framework applies and we need to use it. It's not that it's like, we really need to use it. And the tobacco industry themselves, they are using it. They are co-opting the terms that we use. They are using a supposedly harm reduction that is focused on human rights when it's not. So we really need to use it and to showcase how the tobacco industry is co-opting the terms that they shouldn't, because they are not doing a genuine harm reduction, for example. So yeah, just to add that.
Well, that's an important point about the tobacco industry has been using human rights arguments and rhetorics, as well as environmental rhetorics for the protection of the environment, to whitewash, greenwash their own image. Very often if they really wanted to address the human rights impact aspect of tobacco, they would do what the Danish Institute for Human Rights recommended, which is basically to cease the marketing and selling of tobacco products. So the next question is, and Sonja, you talked about that also, about that, how you use that to increase your network, to not just work with tobacco control communities, but it allowed you to bring work with more people. And one of them, someone in the audience asked, for example, about in this case, there's a campaign to end U.S. child labor, and there's a child labor coalition who's trying to try to get actions to get the U.S. to ban and the U.S. House and Senate to ban child labor in tobacco, in U.S. tobacco. And so it seems to me that it's something that obviously could be of interest of obviously the people who are attending the webinar today. But my question is also, how do we make that connection also between what we do at the local level within the US or other countries and those global processes? Kelsey, you mentioned, for example, the United States does not ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but the Universal Periodic Review, for example, does apply to the United States. So how could those type of actions, like this action towards the House and the Senate, be linked to a process like that, to a human rights treaty mechanism process?
So as one of the few Americans on this panel, I can express my displeasure with my country and how few treaties that we are actually party to. But we have to work with what we can, and every country has different obligations. The US is a party to a treaty called the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So we have been using that committee to try to move things forward, specifically around the menthol ban. In order to get the FCTC ratified or any human rights treaty ratified, we need 2/3 of the Senate, and that seems unlikely. But that doesn't mean that we can't take federal action or even state action. And a lot of these human rights arguments can be used to move the needle at those levels. Our partners at the DC Tobacco Free Coalition used human rights arguments in their proposal for a flavor ban in DC and got that passed. So we're seeing this trickle down and trickle back up. So don't be afraid to use these arguments at every level.
Also, a topic that really comes up a lot now within the UN system, but also at country level, and there were surveys that were being done, is the lack of opportunities for youth to engage in a lot of those multilateral processes, those UN international treaties, and to engage both. That's what's going on at the local level, sometimes at the national level, or through those processes. So could you tell us a little bit how, and Sonja, you managed to do it practically with Germany, but it seems to me that those reporting, that's a great opportunity to engage youth in a very meaningful way in a legal global process where they can engage, make a difference when they're youth, and call for a better world and a tobacco and nicotine-free world. So if you can, we have 5 minutes, so if you can, you'll ask the three of you, maybe conclude around that, and how can this be a tool for youth to really engage working with tobacco control groups at national level, in supporting, engaging in those reporting processes?
Maybe I can just start shortly. Actually, the most important thing is that it matters to them, that the children we were working with, first we just talked about children's rights, and then we talked about how tobacco is maybe affecting their daily life, and then we talked a lot about their work, their walk to school and everything. So then it started to matter to them. And when they get connected and it matters to them, then they also want to talk about it. It is really a pity that we couldn't keep connected through the Corona pandemic, because they changed school in that time just before the pre-session, so we didn't have the access anymore. Otherwise, we would have tried to get them into the session. Other children have been to the session, to a special children's session. From the national network, and it was with their own themes. So if you ever come across youth who are interested in changing their environment, having no tobacco smoke around them, not seeing marketing for unhealthy commodities, that's the point to invite them to be part of a longer process. If it is only that somebody goes to the school and does a workshop, and then they should do something, it does not work. It is important, it matters to them. That's yeah, that's my take on that. It is important for them, and then they will do something.
Gianella, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I've been working very closely with young professionals in the past years, and I've seen that the human rights umbrella is very effective to have more voices joining the movement. When you speak about the issue on how different industries are violating different rights, and we start to speak with other young professionals about demanding the state to protect us from the different harms to the different rights. I think it's very important, and it's a very powerful tool that has been used a lot in the environmental movement. And I think that we need to use it more in the tobacco control movement. We really need to build more bridges between the human rights and tobacco control, and bring more young professionals and young people and children to join.
Kelsey?
So I have not worked a whole lot with youth, but I have children, and my husband is a high school teacher, and I live in an area where smoking rates are extremely low, which is good. But I think when I talk to my husband's students or interact with youth at the school, I think they're mostly interested in other things because they think tobacco has been solved. So I think one way of engaging youth is to highlight some of our cross-cutting issues. The environmental issues, the human rights issues, I think child labor, that this generation cares very deeply about some of these issues, and making those connections will bring in some new allies for tobacco control as well.
Thanks. And so it seems like really, and there were those human rights mechanisms that are a great tool to really address that tobacco industry interference, which someone asked. There was a question from the audience to give examples of how does it happen at international, regional, or local level. And we've seen it at every level, whether the tobacco industry for the Morris International used the bilateral trade agreement to challenge Uruguay's health warnings and plain packaging laws. They've challenge in the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, for example. They try to interfere at every way they can, even creating side meetings before where the industry invites government delegates. They challenge when California tried to pass their menthol bans, the first thing they did, litigation against the menthol bans. So the industry will do everything it can at every level to block health policies that challenge their bottom line. And those human rights processes can be quite helpful to denounce this and expose this. So I will take this opportunity then to point out to the World On Tobacco Day report. You can download it there. And I want to thank the panelists for joining us today. Thank you, Gianella, and congratulations again. Thank you, Sonja, for joining us today from Germany, and thank you, Kelsey. Also thank both Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Unfairtobacco, and ASH for sponsoring this event. And thank to all of you for joining us today. And stay connected. We'll keep on having some more ongoing webinars. So please feel free to register for those. And as you know, there's a number of those. There's one this Saturday webinar on Global Youth Voices, and you can register even from our website through the links you see here. There's another one on May 31st, and I know there's a few other ones. The Pan American Health Organization with Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, I believe, and others is organizing one, I believe, on Monday also. So there's a number of series of webinars on this topic. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and continue the wonderful work you do to protect health and the rights of children. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.